Продовжуємо роботу в Українському кризовому медіа-центрі. Наступна наша.
Now we have briefing about executed in Donbas facts of torture and murders. The speakers are Kateryna Vizhevska, author of the report Executed in Donbas, coordinator of the project Executed in Donbas, and Facts of Torture and Murder of the East of Ukraine. Borys Knyrov, author of the report, lawyer of the NGO Myrnyi, and Yatsynych, author of the report, investigator of Myrnyi NGO, retired colonel of Armed Forces of Ukraine. Welcome on stage. Good afternoon. Today we are going to present a report that is called Executed in Donbas Facts of Torture and Murder in the East of Ukraine. This report was prepared by our organization. This is first presentation, and this is case number 1, as we call it. And this project was realized in the framework of coalition of in this report, we gathered the evidence of what happened and what is going on now in the center of Europe, in the east of Ukraine. And it is hard to speak about it. And each of the stories that are presented in this report, and you are going to hear the stories, the members of our team, our activists, we all felt this, and I believe that everyone understands that it is difficult and it is not humane. And in our report, we gathered a lot of facts, and about these facts we're going to tell you today. So the target group, and I would like to tell you some details about our organization, Myrnyi. We work from the start of war, and the target group of our work are the victims of armed conflict, both military and civilians, all those who suffered in result of military actions or became victims in the course of ATO. And the aim of our organization and the aim of our report, the aim of our organization is to find those who went missing. We were dealing with this issue since 2014, and in course of the search, we faced the situation that is now in the east of Ukraine. There are violations. The violations of human rights that are guaranteed by Constitution, by different instruments, and our lawyer is going to tell you about it. The members of our team are defenders of human rights, and these are lawyers, programmers, and civil investigators. And the aim of this research was to bring to responsibility those who are guilty, who committed heavy crimes in the east of Ukraine. This is torture, shootings, also arbitrary executions and other brutal violations of human rights. And there are a lot of such violations now. And for us, it is important to bring to responsibility those who are guilty, because we understand that the evil that is not punished, it will increase. So if we leave it at the stage, and that is, it is now, no one will benefit of this. I will tell you about this investigation. This project that is called Executed on Donbas lasted for half a year, and from the start we had a smaller task than we had at the end of our research, because we didn't understand the scope of the problem in the east of our country. And we monitored internet resources, and we understood that not all information is true on the internet. Moreover, we also processed preliminary information on the topic, and we inputted in the database, and I won't go into detail about it, but also in our report and in other research of ours, this is the main instrument of our work that provide the opportunity and help us to simplify the work, the investigation, and also for us this is the instrument and the storage of information that we can use further to investigate and to bring to responsibility those who are guilty, both in international and Ukrainian courts. So also we collected evidence. This is video records and photo records, and also there is cartography data that was recorded, and it was provided by the witnesses of the events, and we documented a lot of evidence, and the people told us about all those terrible things, and in many cases these were the witnesses of some inhumane tortures and shootings, and those people, they saw what was going on, and they understood that this could have happened to them as well. So we can see it as the evidence from first hands. So we tried to provide legal help to those who suffered, those who addressed us, and we had contact with these people, and it was easier to communicate with them. And this was the evidence of terrible things, and when you ask people about these terrible things for the first time, people are not always ready to answer. But when you work with this person for some time, so then people open up and tell more. So we tried to conduct our investigation comprehensively, and we tried to have multifaceted approach, and not just to jump to some conclusions. But you can see it in our report, and this is 95 cases, the cases I told you about, and one of our tasks from the start was to investigate and to understand who committed these terrible crimes and why they did it, and what connects these people and what brings them to committing such crimes. And we were not able to establish this logic net and that would identify what forces people to commit such things. And I would like to say that what really impressed me I was told that one woman of 30 years of age, she cut some parts of bodies of men and women, and such cases, I always thought that something forces people to do this, but whether it is limitation of time or effort, but we couldn't find answer why people do such things. Also, we researched this 95 cases that are described in our report, in the first part of our report. And we established some categories. As first, the cause of death. In 33% these were killings or shootings, and in 16 cases with the previous use of torture or violence, maybe some bodily harm or beatings. So before death, people suffered unimaginably. And also we analyzed in what moment these people died, whether it was in the course of detention or in the course of illegal detention. According to our data, out of 95 and 43, the death was in the course of detention, and in 32 instances that happened in the course of illegal detention, and in 20 instances we were not able to establish. Maybe we lacked some time, and in some instances it was not easy to identify whether this person was killed in the course of detention or when in captivity. In these cases, in each of these cases, so there are suspects, and we cannot say 100% that these people did it, but we have enough evidence in order to provide this information to law enforcement bodies, because this is their job to do it. And the suspects in 49 cases were the members of DPR militant group. In 30 cases, these were the representatives of LPR militant group, and in 5 instances, we were not able to identify who committed these crimes. And there were 11 cases in which the suspects were the representatives of the armed forces. And also we investigated the percentage of women and men who suffered. And in 95 cases, 84 men and 11 women killed. Moreover, we may say that in 50 cases, these were for civilians, and in 45 instances, these were military. Speaking about these cases, maybe I should say not only about figures, not about statistics. I believe that Ukraine and the whole civilized world should know and understand that when someone hangs a person and cut the skin from this person, this should not be tolerated. And if someone drills a person's leg or just break the fingers with a hammer and cut fingers, this and they used those who were detained as sappers, and they put them in the minefields. So this is not normal. We should not tolerate this. It happens now in our country. And we should fight this, and we should inform people about these instances. And we carried out this research, and you can read about it. And we also provide information about Ukrainian legislation and international legislation on these cases. And I would like to give the floor to our lawyer. Please, Borys.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning to those who watch us on stream. I would like to say the following things. As my colleague Faye mentioned, we have compiled a database which contains data about those who were killed, executed, murdered, tortured, missing, etc. That database is protected in line with the Ukrainian law about protection of personal information, that those people allowed to process personal information about them. We have analyzed also the data about those people who allegedly committed those crimes. We have data about executions fulfilled upon the illegal verdicts from the courts of DPR and LPR. We have the data about numbers of tortured and murdered and killed, and this brings us to the figures which are comparable to the Stalin's and Nazis regimes, to the number of victims of Stalin's and Hitler's regime. Actually, all those crimes are subject of the international law, and more specifically, these are the crimes against humanity. Ukraine, unfortunately, has not ratified the Rome Statute, and nevertheless, we had the resolution of the Parliament from 21st November about recognition of the provisions of the statute. We believe that those crimes which were committed and the evidences that we collected, the evidences of those crimes, could be used as materials in the investigations of the future criminal proceedings, and we believe that at the national level the efficient investigation of those crimes also should be established. Unfortunately, Ukrainian legislation fails to start such investigations in line with the generally accepted, globally accepted standards of the international humanitarian law. Unfortunately, Ukrainian criminal code does not contain any criminalization of some war crimes and does not allow to bring to responsibility the war criminals. Thus, Article 438 of the Ukrainian criminal code generally stipulates that perpetrators should be brought to responsibility for violation of human rights in course of war, but it does not set specifically punishment for this. In the investigated cases which we present in our report, we suggested preliminary pre-qualification of those crimes and offenses, and now this is the role of the further investigation and court to qualify those crimes in line with Ukrainian legislation. The international treaties which were approved by the Parliament of Ukraine are fully applicable in the national law, are fully implemented in national law, and actually we have all the means to bring to responsibilities the perpetrators in line with the Geneva Convention about protection of the war victims, the Hague Convention, etc. In the investigated cases, the energy of victims is aiming to push the investigator to do what he has to do in line with his position. For example, people who are missing, the relatives and family cannot push the investigator to carry out necessary investigative or procedural actions. Quite often the applicants in those claims about missing people, they even do not know their role, which should be explained to them by the investigator. Quite often the poor efforts and poor position demonstrated by investigators brings to nothing brings to nothing the whole investigation process. Except for some exemptions, the investigators sometimes call to victims once a year, for example, and ask whether they have got some additional information about those offenders or perpetrators who tortured them. This requires efficient investigation, we demand more efficient application, more efficient enforcement of national criminal law. The local authorities should demonstrate initiative in search of missing people, not waiting for submission or claim from the relatives and family. And then those local authorities should provide that gathered information about missing people to the law enforcement agencies. So we believe that non-action or poor action of law enforcement bodies allows impunity and insufficient investigation of the tortures and crimes in the occupied territory. Now about the controlled territory of Ukraine. In occupied territories, since DPR and LPR are not subjects of the international law, and the situation with human rights there could not be efficiently controlled. Unfortunately, neither Ukrainian party nor international observers have no full access to those territories. In this condition, we think that we should see international pressure upon Russian Federation as the only way to force the parties to put an end to the conflict and revive Ukrainian control over the territory. We know that Russian Federation keeps control over banned formations, which is recognized by the UN resolution, which puts responsibility for DPR and LPR deeds, which puts the responsibility for them upon the Russian Federation. Also, provisions of such resolution mention that restitution of the victims should be put on Russian Federation. As we know, the Russian Federation violated state sovereignty of Ukraine, and that treaties and instruments that guaranteed such state sovereignty of Ukraine and territorial integrity, the Budapest Memorandum, etc. That is why we believe that the Russian Federation should be responsible for many of those crimes. Also, Ukraine is responsible for suffering of its own citizens. While social protection of Ukrainian servicemen is high, which is appreciated by the servicemen, at the same time the civil protection, the social protection of victims of combat activities, civil population are not protected. The laws about this, the draft laws on this issue are still in the parliament. We should think carefully how to ensure restitution to the victims, how to cover the lost residential losses, etc. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleague who will describe the most grave crimes. Good morning. In our report, you can find 9 cases where the participants were 12 real persons, and we have noticed that out of the 12, 7 persons were related to each other, had relation to each other. This was around Lugansk on August 5th, 2014, and all those events happened on the day when Minsk agreements, when Minsk agreements had to come to force. In our report, we stated that the major aim of our investigations was bringing to responsibility all the perpetrators who committed deeds which could be classified as the crimes against humanity and war crimes in line with Article 5 of the Rome Statute. So, irrespectively of the fact who committed those crimes, they should be punished, irrespectively whether these are LPR, DPR, Russian volunteers, Russian servicemen, or Ukrainian servicemen or volunteer battalion members. And in course of our investigation, we found out that in late August, early September 2014, Pechersk District Court in Kiev provided access to the military prosecutor to the Ministry of Defense archive. This was decision of the court dated from 29th October of the same year. That is, the military prosecutor's office has to investigate the cases in line with Article 408, 407, this is about desertship, 409, 426, 403, 404, 426. These causes became the result of all those tragic events. Half of all those casualties and tortures which were committed against Ukrainian servicemen could be, I think, prevented. In line with our data that in early September 2014, 204 Ukrainian servicemen deserted, 1,688 military officers deserted from their positions. It was Colonel Gritskov who was in command of that detachment, and And when those servicemen quit from their positions, fled from their positions, cost Ukrainian party a lot. On September 4th, 10 tanks from that brigade were stopped. They fled from Lugansk military positions, combat positions, and were stopped in Kupiansk. And the result of all those events were the events from September 5th. At 4 p.m. on September 5th, Ukrainian military detachment comprising 25 servicemen under command of Junior Lieutenant Malinovsky, 18 servicemen under command of Major Stepanchenko, and 4 servicemen from 22 Battalion repelled unequal forces, which bigger forces of the enemies. So they, since the forces were unequal, they had to retreat. Later, that small detachment, which was separated into smaller groups, they were caught in they were caught in ambush, and when that small group of servicemen was got trapped in the ambush, they had heavily wounded person. They had no cartridges to shoot, and they had to surrender. And they surrendered, and they became prisoners, prisoners of war. Then we have 2 witnesses from the 3rd Territorial Battalion membership, and from the distance of 20 meters, they could observe what had happened. Those 3 arrested persons had to put black bags on their heads, and they were transported to the dam. The next day, the rest, those who wanted to cross the river, they came back to this place and found nobody survived. On June 4th, 2015, near Krutahara village, in 500 meters from this village. The collective grave was discovered. All those 4 people were identified, and these were the same servicemen who were taken as prisoners of war in the date when I mentioned. In course of the investigation, we discovered terrible facts that in course of the exhumation we found also a plate. The plaque said, this grave contains bodies of 4 Ukrainian servicemen who were killed by Ukrainian party and burned. What I mean, for 10 days, they we found the facts saying that those 4 servicemen were executed, were simply shot. When we started to investigate this topic, we identified the author of the video of execution presented in internet, Anatoly Ageev. He is the retired military man from Belgorod in Russian Federation. At the moment when that crime was committed, he was a member of the special detachment Mangust, which was part of the militant forces. Then we identified 3 other participants of that crime. This was one Russian officer from Kazan in Russian Federation, and their friend Krayev Mikhail from Moscow. They all belonged to Zarya battalion. For us, there were a lot of, there remained a lot of ununderstandable facts, and we created and we had simulated the real person in contact. What can I add? Нет. Я скажу, нет, я
So
в закрытом слушании слушаю.
there were grave violations, and they found out that anatomy of the body was distorted, and some fractions and were done to the hands, and also the anatomy of the body was distorted, and this is confirmed by examination, and this caused heavily body harm, and also this was done to the body by this heavy metal instrument. So person really suffered a lot before he died. And then about the 5th of September events, we revealed the facts that this day, in the same locality, that is between Szczęście and Mestalist, so our detachments, they left the positions and were deployed in Seversk Donetsk region, and in this time they got into ambush, and the detachment of the 24th Battalion of Territorial Defense Unit, they got into this ambush, and there are a lot of video materials about it, and separatists of illegal armed groups, they placed this video on YouTube. I would like also to say about a separate case that happened. Tulov, nicknamed Gvozdь, this man was among 28 people from Aidar, and the car blew up, and he was outside the car, and he was his life was under threat, and this detachment, they do not take people in captivity, and so this was a terrible death. First they cut his belly, and you see it on the first photo. He was shot dead in his head, and there was a video, and in our further investigation, we also found amateur video, and there is a voice recorded of Alexei Yuryevich from St. Petersburg. This is the militant, and his words. So I cut his belly, so we should shoot him. and he made an order to a person, and this person says yes. So he created this ambush, he shot our soldiers, and there are a lot of cases like this. So unfortunately, we do not have time to focus on other cases. So unfortunately, we do not have time for questions, so you can put your questions off records. And in 1 minute, we will have next press event. We hope that those who are guilty will be punished.